Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, and thank you for joining today's webinar. Today, we will be talking about how to prepare for a breach. My name is Michael Holden from Bytes Security Partnerships. I'm pleased to be joined today by Ed Rowley, who is an SE manager at Proofpoint, and Manoj Bhatti, who is a pre-sales consultant from Thales, who will be taking us through the bulk of today's presentation. The agenda for the webinar. Firstly, a short overview of Bytes. Then we will go through some of the discussion points for the session. We will then move into the bulk of the presentation from Ed and Manoj, which will be followed by a Q&A session. But first, some housekeeping. Attendee lines will be on mute throughout the session. There will be a Q&A at the end, so please post any questions in the questions window, and I will field them during the Q&A. This is a purely strategic discussion. Any commercials can be discussed with your Bytes account manager after the session. Everyone will receive the recording after the session. And lastly, we have a feedback survey at the end of this presentation and would appreciate it if you could take 2 minutes to complete it, as we use this to make sure that our webinars are still hitting the mark. So, who are we? Bytes Security Partnerships is the specialist security partner of the Bytes Group in the UK. Bytes aim to marry up the agility, insight, and personal approach from a smaller specialist partner with the scale and scope that comes with being a part of a much larger group. We are proud here at Bytes of the technical expertise we have around the solutions we deploy, and that allows us to enjoy the top-tier vendor partnerships, which allows us to deliver for customers on both the technical and commercial sides. We work across the full spectrum of information security, from perimeter and next-gen firewall through to cloud and mobile security, data security, and access and authentication, offering both hardware and software solutions. What we offer and add value to business and vendor partner solutions is the technical suite of services that we are able to deploy, whether that's looking at security strategy deployment, technology mapping, project scoping, planning and delivery, or 24/7 direct engineer support. There are a wide variety of ways in which we can act as an extension of your IT teams to make sure that the solutions you deploy add value quickly. That's enough about us. Let's talk about preparing for a breach. Today's discussion will share how we can make use of varied tools to ensure that if your organization is breached, you are able to protect your people, brand, and revenue. As mentioned, we are joined today by Ed from Proofpoint and Manoj from Thales. Bytes hold a top-tier vendor partnership with both Proofpoint and Thales. Proofpoint is a leader in Gartner's Magic Quadrant for security awareness training. And with the acquisition of Gemalto, Thales have brought market-leading encryption, access management, and two-factor authentication into its portfolio. That's enough from me. Over to you, Ed.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thanks to the team at Bytes SP for arranging this, but importantly, thank you everybody who's attending and listening in. I look forward to your questions later on. Without further ado, I will get going. Even though I just read an article this morning that said that PowerPoint isn't the best tool for communication and people don't get much out of it, I'm going to leave with that anyway and learn in the future. So protecting yourselves and preventing fraud, protecting your brand, protecting your revenue streams. What are we seeing? Our security threat research team are one of the best in the business, and what we've noticed over the past few years is that attacks are increasingly targeting people, not infrastructure. More than 99% of successful breaches rely on an individual to either run malicious code or take action. We have seen that the vulnerabilities that were exploited so frequently in sort of the late 2000s and the early part of the last decade, seems weird saying that, are no longer really working. Software developers have improved the way that they create their products. Patching is better. Organizations are more aware of what precautions they need to take and what measures they need to take to apply patches and secure all of their infrastructure. And attackers have seen this, and they have known, as criminals have done for centuries, that the biggest vulnerability lies with individuals. Okay. With the increasing move to the cloud, this has led to a huge increase in the number of phishing attacks, corporate credential phishing attacks in particular. Office 365 is probably the best example of this, but also other products like Salesforce, Dropbox, Box, amongst others, G Suite. And we have seen a huge increase in the number of people who are having their accounts compromised. Almost 80% of our, well, more than 80% of our organizations that we work with are exposed to some sort of compromise or another. Okay? So we're targeted by them, with nearly half of them actually being successfully compromised. And there are active compromised accounts in many of our customers. Couple this with the headline news hitting email fraud problem that the FBI, completely independent crime agency in the US, estimates to be value of $26.2 billion a year over the last few years. This is a huge problem, and it's reached the board level, reached the boards of multiple organizations. So what can we do about that? And you know, what's the impact? Well, first of all, that move to the cloud has seen many problems arise for organizations. Yes, it is secure, and it can be worked with very effectively. Office 365 is a fantastic tool that's empowering lots of people. It's reducing operating costs, improving collaboration, but it's also being used by criminal gangs. The largest hoster of malware, malicious URLs, malicious files, is Microsoft itself, with OneDrive, SharePoint, Azure being used to host much of the malware that we're seeing out there. That's the #1 problem. So criminals using crimeware as a service, using their using tools available to them to run their business, just as we run cloud tools to run our businesses. And fraud, there are 2 types of email fraud in particular that I want to look at today. There's the BEC fraud, but there's also EAC. So we've got business email compromise and email account compromise. So business email compromise is that the criminals pretend to be you. They perpetrate this fraud using techniques like domain spoofing, display name spoofing, where they are coming in from a completely separate domain, but in the when you read the message, it looks as though it's come from a legitimate sender from your organization. And of course, the cousin domain spoofing or lookalike domain spoofing. You might see that like Microsoft.com could be M1Crosoft.com. Everybody's seen examples of these. There are multiple ways of blocking those, more on that later on. Importantly, though, we also see a big rise in email account compromise or employee account compromise, where criminals are stealing a valid identity and using that to perform their fraud. Right? And this can have a huge impact on an organization's brand, its revenue stream, and its ability to do business. We see supply chain fraud being particularly hit by this, but also customers and of course internal users. I think my favorite example, not that it should be a favorite example, but probably the best example of this is, of course, the errant CEO whose account was compromised. The criminal lay dormant for several weeks and just watched how the CEO communicated with various people within his organization. In particular, he looked at the CFO and the details of the emails that they exchanged. Now, with a compromised account, this criminal also had access to this executive's calendar. With this information, the knowledge of the CEO's whereabouts, and also the knowledge that they gleaned of how they communicate, the terms and phrases that he used with the CFO, the criminal gang were able to put in place their attack. And the attack went like this. The CEO went off to meet with a supplier. The criminal knew that that meeting was taking place because they had access to the calendar. Whilst that meeting was taking place, the criminal logged in to the CEO's email account and sent an email to the CFO using the normal sort of language that the CEO used when chatting with that CFO. He said, "I'm in a meeting with this supplier. We've got a great opportunity to get an advance purchase of X, Y, and Z supplies, but we need to wire the money now. Please, can you send the money to," and here's the bank code. Of course, the CFO knows the CEO's in that meeting. The language that's been used looks official, and it's come from an internal email address that is the CEO's email address. So what does the CFO do? Of course, he wires the money. There's the money gone, and not a good time for that organization. We see examples like this coming in weekly, if not daily. And as the FBI have announced, it's a vast problem that costs billions and billions of dollars. But it can also have that impact on brand, which is the topic of today's webinar. Now, to address this, we need to start to think a bit more about how we're going to prevent these attacks. For a long, long time now, we have been defending corporate infrastructure. We've been defending our endpoints, our web servers, databases. We've focused on that corporate network, that corporate infrastructure. Now, of course, lots of things are moving to the cloud, so that the nature of the corporate perimeter has dissolved very, very rapidly over the last decade, and increasingly so. People are working from different locations. People are accessing their data in a different way. People are using their data and storing their data in a different way. And the attackers have seen this. Attackers have moved their attack vector to focus on people. They will use all of that information that's available to them on the internet, via LinkedIn, Facebook, various websites, corporate websites, to identify individuals they want to target, what areas of responsibility those individuals have, what interests they have, and then they will craft attacks that are specific to those users, where appropriate, to get entry into that organization. So they're no longer targeting machines, they're targeting people, and people have their own vulnerabilities. Think of our emotions. It could be greed, it could be tiredness, it could be distress, something that's distracting us from paying attention. So even though as highly trained professionals at times may lower their guard, we need to change the way we think about security and adopt what we call a people-centric approach to security. Now, we start this off by looking at the individuals within an organization and trying to work out who your VAPs are. That's right, VAPs. You've often heard of VIPs, but at Proofpoint, we're talking a lot about VAPs. Now, the V stands for vulnerable. These are your clickers. These are the people who aren't paying attention properly. They work in insecure ways. They'll click on anything that's sent to them. They're a problem. You also have your A's. These are your highly attacked people. These are the people who are highly present on your website, usually the executives or spokespeople, possibly the PR folk. These are people who've got a high profile and they're attacked. And then finally, we've got the privileged people. These are people who have access to data, to information, or to other people. It may be the assistant to an executive. It may be somebody who has access to the database, a local admin, or sorry, a sysadmin. It could be someone who has access to high net income earners' financial details. And then we get a combination of these who are the vulnerable, highly attacked, and privileged people. And once we know these, we can use that information to drive a much better security policy and a security posture. But how are people being attacked? According to the annual Verizon data breach incident report, the vast majority of successful breaches start with an email. And we see that reflected in the various credential phishing attempts that we see, with bits of malware that are posted to people, lots of documents with a macro or with a link to some malware hosted up on a site somewhere. But increasingly, we're seeing this in the cloud as people are moving their accounts to the cloud. People are storing data on the cloud. Microsoft Office 365. Microsoft try to do a very good job with security. They've got everybody's best interests at heart. But sometimes when security doesn't work, when security gets in the way of doing business, they have to make some sacrifices. And this is what happened with Office 365. Office 365 initially had a maximum number of attempts you could put your password in before it locked you out for a while. Now, so many people were using Office 365. People kept forgetting their passwords, kept re-entering it, kept getting locked out, forced a lot of work for sysadmins. So Office 365 had to revoke that policy, which has opened up the door for password spray attacks, brute force attacks on passwords, and subsequently the ability for many cloud accounts to become compromised. We'll talk about multi-factor authentication later on in great depth and some of the ways you can protect yourselves against that. But moving on, we also have internal email. Once an account has been compromised, the criminals can move laterally within an organization. They've got a trusted account, they've got access to a trusted account, they've got their foothold in an organization, but that's not the target user they want, but they can use that internal account to spread themselves internally, to get the trust and get to that targeted person, and make sure that they can compromise their account and then get to what they want to do, whether that's exfiltrating data, getting access to money, or whatever goal they have. And finally, something we're seeing happen quite a bit, because people are securing their corporate gateways, criminals will sometimes try and shift to a user's personal mail, personal web mail. So we need to find ways to try and protect users from their own personal mail and giving out that, or increasing their suspicion when they do get messages coming in that way. A number of different ways of doing this. First of all, training people, maybe running a phishing simulation, see who clicks on what, see who's gullible, see who needs more training. And once you know that, you can run the training program for them. Now, a training program isn't a one-off solution. A training program really is a program of continued and consistent enablement and awareness. We are trying to change behavior, not just educate people on a one-off basis, but change people's behavior in the long term. Once you've got people trained, they can help become part of the solution. You can put in place an abuse mailbox. So the good guys, the people who are really good, can start to report messages back into you and kind of close the loop on that threat, and everybody will benefit from that. What else can we do to help people? Well, if someone is compromised, we need to protect their data or the materials they have. So we need to have some data leakage protection tools in place. We need to be able to identify what data is where and who is trying to share it. There are a number of different ways of doing that. I'm not going to talk too much about products today, but if you want to bring that up in the questions or have a conversation at a later date, we can talk about the different ways we can protect data from leaving an organization, either via email or, importantly these days, also in the cloud. We also need to know about people's posture and privilege, your security posture for people and privilege. This is particularly relevant when people have moved to the cloud. When you've got a corporate network, which is all behind lots of firewalls, there's an assumption that your data is safe. However, many organizations have moved out to the cloud, but have kept that same assumption. Oh yeah, it's a multi-tenanted environment, but we're safe. But forget about the privileges or the rights assigned to the information that they're sharing. There's a great deal of overshare taking place in the cloud, with people making many sensitive documents private or sharing with everybody within an internal organization. So understanding where data is and what the data is out there, and who has access to that, which departments, also who has local admin rights. Does everybody in a department need local admin rights to their computer? And again, consider putting in place tools to protect this, multi-factor authentication, step-up authentication, which you'll hear about in a bit more. Moving on, to protect people's webmail, there are multiple tools out there that go way beyond the secure web gateway approach that people have been using for a long time. There's isolation tools that you can run a private or personal email session in a remote sandboxed browser, completely off the network, prevent people from downloading information, prevent people from entering their corporate credentials until that website has been cleared, but also putting in place zero trust authentication tools that mean that once someone's in the network, they don't have access to everything, they have access only to what they need. So again, you're restricting the ability for a successful criminal to be able to spread themselves across the network. And finally, impersonation. One of the biggest problems with fraud is that email impersonation, and the number one attack vector, again, being email. We see this day in, day out, criminals pretending to be somebody else. Now, we authenticate lots of things. We authenticate users, we authenticate ourselves. When we log onto a network, we force machines to authenticate. A lot of people don't use authentication when it comes to email, and it's actually a very straightforward approach using DMARC. The problem with DMARC is that it can be a little bit too simple for some folk and can cause problems if you don't understand how to apply the policy correctly. The reason for that is because we're using so many different cloud tools now, we can lose track of who is sending legitimate email on our behalf. So working with Proofpoint, we can help you get to your DMARC P=reject policy to help you authenticate your messages to ascertain that when you send a message, your customers, your supply chain can be very certain that it is coming from you, that it's legitimate, and when it isn't coming from you, they can reject those messages, increasing the security, increasing your brand, and increasing the sort of the trust that you have with your customers, with your supply chain, and so on, and of course, reducing fraud. With that, as I'm rapidly approaching the end of my session, what can you do? I've talked about email. A lot of people, for BEC fraud, the business email compromise, and the phishing attacks that we're seeing, you can use gateway protection. Most email security gateway products will provide a degree of protection. Some, of course, are better than others. You can supplement that protection and put that out to your customers, your supply chain, by using DMARC. Build that trust for you. And not only does it reduce the potential of fraud, it also has the benefit of increasing deliverability of your marketing messages. So, anybody out there who has a marketing team and they're sending out emails to their customers and clients, often those messages will potentially, if they're being sent from a third-party service, may get put into the junk folder because they're not passing DMARC. The better you are at managing DMARC, the higher the chance of those messages being delivered. So not only do you increase your protection, you get a distinct return on investment in your marketing budget, which is often of great interest to the CFO, the CMO, or just the marketing team in general, and as a direct business benefit. With this move to the cloud, you need to secure your cloud apps. You need to secure the data that's in those apps. You need to see how they're being accessed. You need to be able to jump on compromised accounts very, very quickly. That's key to being successful in increased cloud adopted environments. We need to look at how we're accessing websites. Do your very attacked people, your vulnerable people, need to be accessing the particularly risky sites directly on your corporate environment? Can you isolate that? It doesn't have to impact everybody, but those people who are most vulnerable, there must be a way to improve security for them, and there is web isolation. Understanding who is being targeted and how they're being targeted, knowing who your VAPs are based on how they're being attacked and by what they're being attacked with, can help drive security policy. You don't need to apply a one-size-fits-all policy to everybody. That can get in the way of business. And security, I often refer to this as the security paradox. When security doesn't work, the more sort of security you throw at something, the more people will find or try and find a way around it, and you inherently become less secure. So applying a strong security profile or policy posture to those people who are being strongly attacked, educating them, making them understand why, whilst not being quite so stringent with others, can have a strong impact. Not only that, it can drive genuine value returns on the whole of your security infrastructure and security spend. You can get more out of applying proper policies to people that need it and really start to get the value of tools and products and services that you've already spent a lot of money on but aren't necessarily using in the most efficient manner. Similarly, you can understand the authentication nature of your customers, your supply chain. Understand if people are sending messages into you and those messages are failing DMARC, do you want to raise that with that particular sender? You want to build trust in them so that you're less likely to become the victim of fraud that's being perpetuated in their name. A long time ago, we lost the notion of 100% security. We have had to come to accept that bad things will happen, and what we need to do is be ready. So having automated remediation and response tools and plans in place will also reduce the damage caused by any successful attacks. And at the very, very heart of this is educating users. Users are the primary targets. we've got to educate them to increase their awareness. And people say you can't patch stupid, but at least you can train people, educate them to make the right decision more often than they potentially do now. There are other tools and other features that you can take. I'm going to hand over now to Manoj, who's going to go through some more of these with you. Thanks everybody for listening, and over to you, Manoj.
Thank you so much, Ed. Thanks so much. Good morning, everyone. In the next 20-25 minutes, I'll take you through the journey of securing your data using various different and what are the actual threats that we see in the world. If you see, the most powerful thing about the time is it has changed. It has changed a lot. Think of the time since 2005 till now, how things have rapidly increased in terms of our consumption of the data, our consumption, the storage of the data, our consumption of actually using the technology. And I'll give you the whole of this in next 1 minute. So if you see, by the time the clock that you see on the top right goes to 0, and these are the numbers for 2017, Spotify added 13 new songs. We sent 15 million text. Twitter user tweeted more than 4,500 tweets. Instagram user posted more than 46,000 pictures. YouTube users watched more than 4 million videos. Uber riders took 45,000 rides. Google users conducted more than 3.5 million searches. Americans used more than 2.5 million gigabytes of internet data. And finally, Amazon made more than $2,500 in 1 single minute. In total, in 2017, we actually consumed 2.5 quintillion bytes of the data in a single day. If you compare it, the 2019 reports aren't out yet. However, it must be or maybe very close to double the amount of data that we used in 2017. This is how rapidly it changes. And it must not come as a surprise that we are losing a huge amount of data every single day. Or in fact, the amount of data that we are losing is close to 100 records per second. So what exactly are the threats? How are we losing? What are the different solutions that we have, or what are the different things that we have to keep in mind? Traditionally, we were always asked to think like a bad guy, think what the hackers would do, think what the hackers are after. However, what we completely forgot is it's not always the bad guys who we should be look for. In a traditional world, this is exactly how we see the threats. Script kiddies are the lowest point, or were the lowest point. Then we had the organized gang, then cybercrime as a service, and then the nation state. Nation states are at the top just because they are the people with a huge amount of money, unlimited number of resources, unlimited amount of money. However, we never thought script kiddies would be as challenging as nation states, because these are the people who, 15-year-olds, 17-year-olds sitting in their mom's garage, dad's garage, and trying to break into organization to steal some credit card numbers. On the other hand, no one took the nation state threat as a proper threat, because why would a nation state go after any organization? However, if you ask Sony, your mind might change and might change in the next couple of slides as well. So this is exactly how we treated the traditional threat. However, the top secret programs of any national organization, organizations like NSA, GCHQ, Israel's Mossad, any of these organizations, when they actually create an exploit, when they actually create an attack, when it goes out in the wild, these are, as I said, these are the people with an extremely amazing number of talented resources and huge amount of money. So when the actual threat goes out in the wild, it becomes a top secret. It's a top secret program. From the top secret program, when it's been released, it becomes a PhD thesis when someone finds it. And then from the PhD thesis, when someone writes a PhD thesis, and then it becomes a hacker's tool. If you don't believe me, you think of Stuxnet, sorry. Everyone knows what Stuxnet was. It was released in 2010, had an expiry date of 2012. However, till today, it is one of the most sophisticated attacks that was created. It was allegedly done by Americans and Israelis to target Iranian nuclear power plant. This is where they actually blew up around 1,000 centrifuges. Again, amazing attack. There was a lot of things that were there in this attack. One was the 4 zero-day exploit. The cost of a zero-day exploit is around 1.5 million, and it may have grown up to 10 million, depending upon what the exploit is. And then they were able to actually steal the private keys of 2 different manufacturers that are located in a single business park in Taiwan. So when they actually launched the attack, the Iranians must have to install a driver. So Americans, or allegedly Americans, or anyone who was actually delivering the attack, they modified the driver of the product, and they signed it using the private keys that they got from the vendor, and then there was some things were happening. Microsoft understood this particular certificate has been compromised. They revoked the certificate. However, just because these guys already had the private keys, they re-signed the certificate, the new certificate, and posted it again. It was an amazing threat. So it was there. However, when it came out in the wild, someone actually looked at it. It became a PhD thesis. You can read about the guy who actually first saw this attack, and then finally, when he published the whole thing, they came up with Son of Stuxnet, which was Dooku. It did a huge amount of damage in some specific part of the world. However, just because the 0 days were already patched in most of the cases, it wasn't a big success. However, it was there. So now we know how the whole thing works now. This completes the whole circle. From the script kiddies to organized gangs to cybercrime as a service to nation states, and nation states exploits becomes hackers tool, and then the script kiddies use these hacker tools to then hack into all different organizations. So now you understand why the attacks are getting more and more sophisticated from the script kiddies. And that's not the whole picture. We talked about cybercrime as a service. If you look, the cybercrime as a service is absolutely amazingly growing. It is so bad that you can actually rent a hacker, and these are amazingly well operated people. They give you amazing level of support 24/7. If it doesn't work, they give you money back. Why is this important? Why are we talking about cybercrime as a service? It's because of one simple reason. Previously, if someone had to attack someone else, they needed 2 different things. One was the intent. Someone must have the intentions of breaking into an organization. And the second was the skills. Now, you had to have skills to break into an organization. You can't just go with an intent saying, oh, I want to break into some big banks, but have absolutely no skills. Cybercrime as a service took the whole thing away. All you have to now do is to have an intent. You can actually go on the dark web and buy all of these exploit and run from them, and they actually give it as a service. So if you trade in Bitcoins, the whole transaction could be completely avoided. It'll be untraceable, almost untraceable transactions as well. So you can do a lot with cybercrime as a service. That's one of the biggest threats that's coming up as well. Now, apart from this traditional threats, we also have the artificial intelligence threats. So we'll take a look at one of the ones that we are noticing in the last few years that has developed huge is something called deepfake. If you know what the deepfake is, it's literally the neural networks. Of what you actually do is you completely transform a live video or a video from one person to a completely different person. Their face, their voices, to our untrained eyes, they look exactly the same person. So you take the picture, a lot of them from one person, and you then put it on someone else's, so they look and sound like the same person. The process of deepfake is amazing. They take a huge amount of pictures that they could find of a lot of celebrities, a lot of political personalities, and then they put all of that into the neural network, and then they actually put the characteristics, different process in place that actually then depicts the person's, how they speak, how they look, the expressions, what changes, everything else as well. It goes to amazingly minute details, and then they see how they, what are the muscles that moves when the mouth moves, and then they're able to create the exact same models. Now, I'll give you a small example of it in the next slide. So if you look at this,
their ability to survive on $8 an hour in New York City. Foremost in all of our minds has been the loss felt by the people of Orlando. Most of us don't get our health care through the marketplace. We get it through our job or through Medicare or Medicaid. And what you should know is that thanks to the Affordable Care Act, your coverage is better today than it was before. Women can get free checkups, and you can't get charged more just for being a woman. Give his employees come together to pass a common bill that would boost America's very, very hard times.
Some progress, at least within the small confines of the legal community. I think it's real important.
Here we go. President Barack Obama, when you giving a speech, make sure you use a lot of pauses. America's businesses have created 14.5 million new jobs.
So you can actually see the actual challenge is huge. So you can actually, it's really hard to understand from one person if it's a real person or if it's not a real person. The actual threats are becoming amazingly well defined. If you think that's the only threat that we have, then you are not looking at the news very often. Apart from what Ed suggested, someone actually taking over someone's CEO's email, it is one of the most shared attacks in the last year or so. However, in the last few months, we saw another attack where the AI technology was used to mimic the voice of the actual CEO to make some payments to someone else. So what we're trying to say is the artificial intelligence threat, they're emerging every single day, and they're getting more and more sophisticated. So what we actually can do, it goes back to the complete the actual the base of the actual security needs, which is the confidentiality, availability, and integrity of the data should be maintained. How do you actually maintain? It's a complete CIO model. It's a base of any cybersecurity trainings or anything. So any data that you're storing, if you actually make sure that it's confidential, its integrity is maintained, and it is highly available, this is how you're able to achieve it. So the actual solution is, or the actual mindset should be, we should, or what we can actually do is, it shouldn't be the mindset where you can say what we can actually do is what we must do is to make sure any information that you're storing, it could be the videos, it could be any other information, you must sign the transactions, you must sign the videos, you must sign all the data, because remember, deepfake is just the first attack that AI came up with. However, these attacks will get sophisticated. So any information that you're storing, make sure that it's not only encrypted, it's signed as well, so that in any amount of time in the future, when you try to visit the same information back, you know the information has not been changed by anything or anyone as well. Make sure that you're properly encrypting your data that you're storing to make sure that no one without any proper access, without the actual ownership of the key, they can't actually see the data or manipulate the data in any which ways. And the third and the final step is to make sure that someone who's actually looking at your data is properly authenticated as well. Ed touched upon it, which is a two-factor authentication, and this is exactly how you'll be able to establish the trust in the data that you're actually storing and the data they are actually seeing as well. Put the data at the complete core of the security. Break down the data at rest into various different layers. This is exactly how we do. We broke down the entire journey of the data into various different layers. Application is the one where the data has been created or generated. Application write down the data into the databases. Databases write it down to the files and folders. Files and folders write it down to the operating system. Operating system write it down to the hypervisor, and finally the data has been written onto the storages, tapes, or the disk. Now, pick any one of these layers where you think it's the most practical for you and the fastest for you to achieve the security at a given point of time, and try to move your way up. Try to encrypt the data in any one of these layers. If you see the first two layers, this is where I call them kind of an intrusive layers. So in application, you have to change something. So you have to use the APIs to encrypt the data in the application. At Thales, we have one or more than one solution to help you in encrypting the data, protecting the data at each one of these layers. At application, we do provide you the APIs to encrypt it using the APIs that you can use in the application. Databases, there's various different ways to encrypt the databases. It could be a transparent data encryption that the databases provide. It could be the encryption of the master key of the databases. File and folder is one of the most consumed, sold, used encryption mechanism of ours. This is where we encrypt either just the files and folders, unstructured data. It could be anything. We also help you in making sure you're encrypting the database at the files and folder level. If you don't have any encryption technology, or you kind of a non-intrusive kind of encryption that is standard across all the databases that you're using in an organization, standard enterprise version, anything. Operating system, hypervisor, VMware vSAN, VMware virtual machine encryption. This is where our solutions are being used, and then huge number of storage, tape, disks. They are actually enabling the encryption concept and the use of external key manager. The most important part is on the bottom left, what you see. The external key manager allows you to make sure that anyone who has access to the data doesn't have access to the key with which it's been encrypted. Anyone who has access to the key doesn't have access to the data. So completely decouple data with the key. So anyone who has access to one shouldn't have access to other. And then, I'm sorry, use this two-factor authentication and a single sign-on. Ed touched on it. However, because of the restriction of time, Ed couldn't complete the most part of it as well. If you speak to him, he'd be able to elaborate. The most attacks, or the most number of attacks that happen, are because of our emotions. We're humans. We're able to make mistakes. Also because of the fact that the actual user experience isn't great. If you actually show people that you can use two-factor authentication, it could be an app on your phone, it could be a hardware token, it could be a message or a notification in your phone. It's really good. However, it's good when they're actually using one or two applications. In a corporate world, we use a huge number of applications. Office 365, Google Suite, Salesforce, and whatnot. We thought at Thales, we were using just 5 or 6. We started counting. The only thing that we can actually count in like less than a minute was like 21 different applications that we're using. We didn't even try to search how many we actually use. We could actually count 21. So the number of applications that you're using in a corporate, you can't ask your users to just rely on static passwords just because they'll use the same password for all the applications. You can't rely on them to then use second factor of authentication because it will be a huge mess every single time they want to access an application. They have to launch their, bring their token, see the one-time password, enter the one-time password. It's not a great user experience. This is where the technology will fail them. That means the best way to do it is to use of a single sign-on. A user comes to office, first thing that he does, boots up his laptop, authenticate to the first application using the second factor of authentication using his OTP token, and then all the other applications are being launched or can be consumed from there onwards without a user needs to authenticate again. Now, one thing that everyone forgets, what single sign-on brings is a single sign-off as well. If a user goes out, for a meeting, sit in a Starbucks, launches the application, authenticates using a second factor of authentication, and then he leaves, he can the only thing that he has to do is to simply log off. That means once he logs off from all the instances of everything. So that simply means no one can actually use the existing session to exploit or do anything just because they are in a public network as well. So use of a single sign-on, it's a great user experience. It highly reduces the threats that you see from the static passwords, people trying to bypass the security as well. Use single sign-on as well. I'm literally at the end. So the one thing that we at Bytes, at Proofpoint, we want to say is, hope is not a strategy. Do the basics of the security, but do them right. Use encryption, use second factor of authentication, use single sign-on, because the threats that you see today, they will become more and more sophisticated. There'll be more targeted attacks on individuals, maybe on machines at some point of time. Again, who knows? So having said that, thank you so much. I'll pass it on back to Michael.
Well, thank you for that, Ed and Manoj. So I just wanted to say thanks to everybody. We haven't got any questions at this point. If anybody does have a question, please do post it into the questions box now, and I will pose those to Ed or Manoj. But thank you to everybody who joined us today. It was good hosting this and presenting to you. Thank you for giving us time out of your day. We know it's a tall order and a big ask to get you down here for an hour or so. So we do appreciate that. Thank you to our presenters today. It was good having you guys along, and I'm sure that the audience found everything very informative and useful. Just going to give it a minute or two for any questions to come through if there are any. Right, it doesn't seem like we have any questions, so that's going to be it then. Again, thank you very much to everybody, and we'll be sending out the webinar recording shortly after this. I hope to see you again soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks all.
Bye, Michael. Bye, Ed.